On the morning of January 5, 1943, something extraordinary happened in the skies over the Solomon Islands. Something so subtle that most of the men who witnessed it didn't understand what they had seen. Lieutenant Red Cochran of the cruiser USS Helena ordered his 5-inch anti-aircraft gun crew to fire at a group of Japanese dive bombers withdrawing after an attack. The raid was already over. Most officers would have conserved ammunition. The enemy planes were small dots retreating across the sky, already outside effective range of conventional fire. Yet Cochran fired anyway. One shell passed within roughly 70 feet of a bomber and without striking it, exploded. The aircraft disintegrated instantly. No one on either side knew it yet, but this was the first time in history a radar-triggered proximity fuse had killed an enemy plane in combat. A device no larger than a fist and protected under a secrecy regime equivalent to the atomic bomb had just changed warfare. To appreciate why this mattered, we must understand how hopeless anti-aircraft combat had been up to that moment. Before the introduction of proximity fuses, shooting down an airplane with artillery was essentially a mathematical absurdity. AA gunners had only two types of fuses: contact fuses, which required a direct hit, and mechanical time fuses, which detonated after a preset delay. Both were disastrously unreliable. Hitting a fast-moving aircraft with a shell traveling thousands of feet per second demanded perfect timing, perfect calculations, and a degree of luck bordering on miraculous. Analysts estimated that 1,000 to 2,000 shells were needed to down a single plane. Sometimes the figure rose as high as 20,000. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, American AA guns fired thousands of shells and shot down none of the Japanese bombers using conventional artillery fire. Worse still, many of those shells, equipped with improperly set or malfunctioning time fuses, fell back into Honolulu and detonated among civilian neighborhoods. 49 civilians were killed by American AA fire, more than the number killed by Japanese bombs in the city proper. This was the grim state of anti-aircraft warfare in 1941, ineffective against the enemy, dangerous to one's own population.
Yet, even before the war, some scientists had imagined a solution. If a shell could sense when it was near its target and detonate on its own, accuracy would increase exponentially. But the technological barriers were immense. A proximity fuse required a tiny, ruggedized radar, a transmitter, receiver, oscillator, battery, and detonator, all small enough to fit inside an artillery shell and tough enough to survive 20,000 Gs of acceleration when fired. Pre-war electronics relied on fragile vacuum tubes, devices that could break if dropped, let alone endure the catastrophic shock of being blasted from a cannon. In 1940, the National Defense Research Committee assigned the problem to a physicist named Merl, who led the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism at the Carnegie Institution. Tuve had no background in weaponry, but he possessed clarity of purpose and an uncompromising sense of urgency. He posted blunt rules around his lab. Time mattered more than money. Perfection was unaffordable. Delivering results on schedule was a moral duty. His team, Section T, set out to achieve the impossible. The key breakthrough came from a young physicist, James Van Allen, later famous for discovering Earth's radiation belts. Van Allen tackled the vacuum tube problem systematically. Using miniature tubes developed for hearing aids, he tested them to destruction. He realized the filaments inside the tubes failed not because the glass shattered, but because the filaments ripped themselves apart under the intense forces of firing. His solution was elegant. Suspend the filament on a microscopic coil spring. The spring would keep the filament under constant tension and prevent destructive vibration. A technician built the prototype under a microscope, and it worked. This single insight made the entire concept of a radar-triggered artillery fuse feasible.
The next problem was power.
Ordinary batteries of the 1940s degraded in storage. Artillery shells might sit unused for years. The National Carbon Company solved this by inventing the reserve battery, a small cell that remained inert until firing. When the shell accelerated down the barrel, the shock shattered a glass ampule inside, releasing electrolyte and activating the battery in microseconds. The battery would work for only a few seconds, long enough for the shell to fly and detonate. Other challenges were equally daunting. Moisture caused electrical failures, G-forces warped components. Spinning at 25,000 RPM distorted the shell's antenna. Safety mechanisms had to guarantee the fuse would not activate while still near the gun. Engineers solved these problems one by one, potting electronics in wax, adjusting tolerances, redesigning circuits. Vast test ranges were set up across the U.S., from Dahlgren to New Mexico, where tens of thousands of shells were fired to understand how the fuse behaved under real conditions. Still, secrecy was absolute. Sylvania Electric, a leader in miniature vacuum tubes, thanks to the hearing aid industry, played a central role in manufacturing. Thousands of women assembled components under extraordinary security, searched going in and out, forbidden from carrying personal items, unaware of what they were building. Over 2,000 companies worked on pieces of the system without understanding how their components fit together. This compartmentalization ensured that even if a factory worker talked, they would reveal nothing meaningful. By late 1942, the first production fuses were ready. Naval tests proved astonishing. During trials aboard the USS Cleveland, 3 target drones were shot down almost effortlessly. The Navy canceled the rest of the 2-day trial schedule. The results were so conclusive there was nothing left to test.
Yet deployment remained limited. Military leaders feared that if even a single dud landed on land, the enemy might recover it and decipher its secrets. Thus, proximity fuses were initially restricted to naval anti-aircraft guns fired over open ocean, where unexploded rounds would sink. The Army was forbidden to use them on land until late 1944. So the first combat use belonged to the fleet, and to that unremarkable-looking moment on January 5, 1943. When Cochrane fired at retreating Japanese bombers, no one imagined that history was turning. The shell that exploded near the fleeing aircraft marked the dawn of a new era. Word spread quietly through the Pacific. Gunnery officers trained by Van Allen and others began integrating the new ammunition into battle practice. The effects were transformative. The number of shells required to down an aircraft dropped from thousands to mere hundreds. Against kamikazes, whose straight, unbroken approach paths were ideal targets, the success rate soared. By 1943, proximity fuses made up only a quarter of the ammunition used by the fleet, yet accounted for half of all aircraft shot down by AA fire. Their effectiveness was roughly triple that of conventional timed shells. By 1945, they were considered indispensable. The proximity fuse became one of the most influential technological innovations of World War II.